the paper analyzing the HPKE standard. That is joint work with Joël Alven, Bruno Blanchet, Eduard Haug, Eike Kiltz, and Doreen Riepel. So HPKE stands for Hybrid Public Key Encryption, where hybrid is in the sense of the ChemDem paradigm, where we use an asymmetric building block as key encapsulation mechanism and a symmetric building block as data encapsulation mechanism for efficiency reasons. And there is a new standard in development by the Cryptoforum research group inside the RTF, which will use modern building blocks, which will have in CCA security proofs and test vectors, which will help interoperability. And this new standard will be used in two IETF projects, namely the encrypted client hello extension of TLS 1.3 and the messaging layer security group messaging protocol MLS. Now, the standard defines many interfaces and modes. We only analyze one of them, namely the single-shot encryption interface in authenticated mode. So our object of analysis is an authenticated public key encryption scheme. And now I'm starting something that the on-site audience did not hear yet. So that's the overview of the construction of authenticated public key encryption in the standard. It uses an authenticated KEM to generate and encapsulate a shared secret, and then uses a key schedule function to derive a symmetric key and a nonce, and finally encrypts the message using this key and nonce using a DEM, like an AED scheme, for example. In this work, we developed security notions and proved them for authenticated KEM and authenticated PKE. First, chosen ciphertext indistinguishability, which covers confidentiality of encapsulations and ciphertext, and second, authenticity, which covers unforgeability of encapsulations and ciphertexts. And for these two, we have two different settings. First, the outsider setting, where an adversary can choose from the honest key pairs when calling oracles, and no honest key pair is compromised. And then the insider setting, where the adversary is allowed to choose sender or receiver secret keys. And this is a stronger notion than if we would only allow to compromise honestly generated key pairs. The standard instantiates the authenticated KEM with a Diffie-Hellman-based construction, and for this, we prove outsider CCA, insider CCA, and outsider out security notions, and also for the generic APKE construction that I just showed. Against the insider out notions, there is attacks against the Diffie-Hellman-based AKEM and also against the generic construction. So I said it's a Diffie-Hellman-based instantiation of the authenticated KEM, and HPKE allows for 5 different elliptic curves to be used with it. First, 3 NIST curves, and then curve 25549 and curve 448. And it's important to know that while these NIST curves are prime order groups, curve 25549 and curve 448 are not prime order groups. So to give one particular example of a consequence, that is that for each honestly generated public key in these two curves, there is a small number of equivalent public keys that would lead to the same Diffie-Hellman shared secret. Now, to analyze HPKE for all these 5 different groups, we define a framework we call nominal groups to cover both prime order and non-prime order groups in one model. And in short, we do not assume a group structure, but we only assume an exponentiation function with certain properties. So to conclude, last slide, what we did in this work is prove that HPKE out satisfies its desired security properties with a maximum security level of 128-bit. Most of our proofs are done in the CryptoVerif proof assistant. And what we prove is the following, as I said, these 3 properties for a Diffie-Hellman-based AKEM. Then we prove that the key schedule is a PRF. And finally, we prove composition theorems, assuming that we have an AKEM that adheres to these security notions. We prove that the AKEM-DEM construction adheres to the appropriate notions respectively. And then we provide handwritten proofs for all for these security notions that single user, 2 user notions for AKEM imply their multi-user security notion. And that's, for example, useful to close the gap to proofs of, for example, post-quantum KEMs, because they are usually only analyzed in single user, 2 user notions. We leave one open question, and that is about the multi-key security of current AAD schemes, because the current proofs cannot really guarantee that AES 128-bit GCM, for example, can really provide multi-key security for 128-bit. So that's an open question we leave. And to repeat, we have this contribution of independent interest of re-randomizable nominal groups to cover prime order and non-prime order groups in one model. So if you take away one thing from this talk, remember that curve 25519 and curve 448 are not prime order groups. Please spread the word. If you want to read more about this, make sure to read the long version of our paper, because we did some fixes since the conference version. And if you want to learn CryptoVerif, there's a recorded video tutorial. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. I don't see any questions online remotely. Are there any questions in the room? Yes, I'm gonna come to you. What was it?
So you were saying that the groups that, like, I don't remember the group order, but there are some non-prime order groups. But are there subgroups that are prime order actually that can be used fairly, I mean, like kind of similarly?
Yes, so inside curve 25519 and curve 448, there is prime order groups. What we do in the model is we need to identify the subset of honestly generated private keys, and then another set of private keys in which the discrete lock is unique. And for prime order groups, these two sets are the same. And for curve of these other two curves, they are not the same. So we have a parameter in the model, delta n we call it, which is 0 for prime order groups and which is negligibly small for curve 25519 and curve 448. And basically in the proof for each honestly generated private key, we will need to add one delta n to the probability bound. Thank you.
Thanks. Any more questions in the audience? Let me check again if something popped up online. I don't see any other questions. So in the interest of time, we will move to the next talk. Thank you again, Benjamin.
Thank you.
How do you get this out of the way? Okay. Yeah, seems it's working. Okay. So the next talk on tightly secure authenticated key exchange revisited by Tibor Jäger, Eli Kiltz, Doreen Ripple, Sven Schege, and Doreen is going to deliver the talk.
Yes, thanks for the introduction. So this talk will be about authenticated key exchange, short AKE, and I will directly start with that. So in AKE, we consider two users, Alice and Bob, and they exchange some messages, and in the end, they will use these to compute a shared session key. And the session key can then be used with a symmetric primitive to encrypt further traffic. And AKE is a very important cryptographic building block. It is widely used in practice, for example, in the TLS protocol. And when we analyze the security of AKE protocols, we put an adversary Eve in between the interaction. And now we don't only consider two users, but in the security model, we have many users holding many sessions. And we let Eve control the whole network. That means she can drop, inject, or modify messages. We also give her access to secret information. That means she can corrupt the user's long-term keys, she can reveal ephemeral states, and also session keys. And then we model security with a so-called challenge oracle. So in this case, Eve wants to challenge the session between Alice and Bob, which means she gets either the real key or a random key, depending on a secret bit B. And in our model, we have multiple of these challenge queries, which all use the same challenge bit. And this is tightly equivalent to real or random security, which is mostly used in composition theories, because as I said, we don't want to use AKE as a standalone primitive, but we want to compose it with a symmetric scheme. Some background on provable security. So this security experiment I just explained is modeled as a game between challenger and an adversary. And as usually done, we prove security by contradiction using a security reduction. That means we assume there exists an adversary A against our scheme, in this case, the AKE protocol, and we use that adversary to build another adversary B that solves a computationally hard problem. And we now call this reduction tight if A and B have about the same advantage and about the same running time. And what that means in particular for AKE, these bounds should not depend on the numbers of users and the numbers of sessions. And this is relevant in order to choose the system parameters, because in fact, only a tight proof allows you to use like standard parameters in a theoretically sound way. So the first tightly secure AKE was proposed by Bada et al. At TCC 2015. They focused on AKE in the standard model, but they used a slightly different model. So they, in their model, for each challenge, they choose a new random bit. And in the end, the adversary only has to guess like one of these bits, which does not have these tight composition properties that we actually want. Then at Crypto 2018, Justin and Jager proposed some variant of the scientific Hellman protocol in the random oracle model, which allows them to get tight proof, but they also use this multi-challenge bit model. Then at Crypto 1 year later, Kuhn-Gordon et al. Analyze also the Diffie-Hellman protocols in the random oracle model. And they are the first to introduce this single challenge bit model in the context of AKE, but their proof is not completely tight. Then last year at Asia Crypt, Liu et al. Focused again on standard model AKE, but they switched back to this multi-challenge bit model. And now our work analyzes two AKE protocols in the random oracle model. We have a tight proof in this more useful single challenge bit model. And in addition to that, we also look at a slightly stronger model where we allow ephemeral state reveals. Some background on our contributions. So it is widely known how to build AKE with implicit authentication from key encapsulation mechanisms. But the question is, how can we get this implication tight? And this is what we analyzed, and we proposed something we call a non-committing KEM plus the random oracle to get this tight. And we can also instantiate this non-committing KEM with a hash proof system. And if the hash proof system has a tight multi-instance subset membership problem, as for example DDH, then we also get this implication tight. But coming back to our non-committing KEM security notion, I want to justify why we need such a seemingly strong notion, and this is due to the AKE security experiment, which is quite involved. So the adversary can get these long-term keys of the users, and the long-term keys are KEM secret keys. So we also need to output these secret keys adaptively. But at the same time, we have to embed challenge ciphertext in all sessions, because we do not know if the adversary will reveal or challenge one particular session. And so we must embed challenge ciphertext, but even if the secret key is leaked afterwards, these challenges must decrypt correctly. And also the adversary is active. That means he can come up with its own ciphertext and send this to the game. And then we must decrypt the ciphertext to simulate correctly. And this is what we capture in our non-committing KEM security notion. We also look at a second scheme, which adds an additional signature scheme to achieve explicit authentication. Yeah, and this is, if you're interested in more, then look at our video or paper on ePrint. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doreen. no remote questions yet. Are there any questions in the audience? Well, while people come up with questions, I may have one. So in your paper, you proved that you can construct this non-committing KEM from HPS. What about the other direction? Is it necessary to have HPS in order to have non-committing KEM?
It's not necessary. So we looked at different instantiations, for example, using this now Young paradigm. I think the most important point is that we have to answer these corruption queries. So we always must know one of the secret keys. And this is where hash proof systems really help us. But we could also do something with this double encryption and then knowing like one of the secret keys and then building this from CDH. But because of this doubling of all the communication, this was less efficient. So we stick with that one.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more questions? Okay, if there are no more questions, let's thank Doreen again and let's move on to the next talk. Thanks. So the next talk on aggregatable distributed key generation by Kobe Gurkan, Filip Jovanovic, Mary Meller, Sarah Michael John, Gillette Stern, Alin Tomescu, and Mary is going to deliver the talk. Please, Mary.
Hey everyone, if I stand here, can you hear me? So today I'm going to be talking about a type of distributed key generation, which has the special property that we're able to aggregate all of the contributions of all of the different parties into one transcript, which makes verifying that the process has been done correctly fairly efficient for the verifier. Our contributions are fourfold, or our main ones. The first is a construction of a DKG, which satisfies this property. Because we're able to aggregate, we get huge efficiency gains over other protocols. The output of our DKG is not a field element, but a group element. So in order to keep this useful, we also provide a fully structure preserving VUF is what I've called it in the slides. What I mean by this is basically just a signature scheme, a unique signature scheme. So something very similar to BLS, which is compatible with our DKG. Our third contribution is some new definitions. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the DKG definitions in the literature, but typically they either are very difficult to realize. Typically they are either very difficult to realize or they're very sort of fuzzy and vague. And the reason they can be vague is because what you're trying to define is dependent on the scheme. Like you're not trying to say that you're able to reconstruct like you would in secret sharing. Instead, you're trying to say that you are able to output some kind of public key such that people know the secret key such that they can't break some property of the underlying scheme. So this is a notion that we try and capture. And related to the notion of these new definitions, we also have new proving techniques, which we are able to use only because we're using these new definitions. So we're not capturing this full notion of simulatability. Instead, all we're saying is that if you can corrupt the DKG, then you would be able to break the original signature scheme or encryption scheme under which you're trying to generate a public key for. So the general idea of a distributed key generation algorithm is to distribute trust. I'm sure there's no surprise there. The two classic cases where it comes up are threshold encryption. So you want T out of N parties to be able to decrypt a message, but any less than that shouldn't be able to, and threshold signatures. So at least T out of N should be able to generate a signature, but less than that should not. The threshold signature application is especially relevant to random beacons. So this comes up in consensus algorithms all the time, where you have a problem with the person who plays last. because the person who plays last, they know the state of the network, they know what everyone else has output, and they might be able to use this to gain some kind of advantage. A random beacon will be able to get around this because if you have a random beacon, then nobody is going to be able to manipulate that output in advance. So it's not just random, it's also not unbiasable, which is a stronger property than you would get from just a hash function. So the big thing about RDKG is we don't have complaints rounds, which is what you would typically have in, for example, the Pedersen DKG or the Gennaro DKG. Other people, when they've been referring to this notion, have called it a non-interactive DKG. Basically what this means is it means that rather than having some sort of consensus algorithm where first I say something and then I wait for you to say something and then I say, oh no, what you said is wrong. Instead, all I'm going to do is publish something with all of the encryptions of all of the information that everyone needs to know, and then prove that I've generated this transcript, is what we call it, correctly. The second contribution I mentioned is this new VUF. So our new VUF is related to BLS, but like I say, it is compatible with RDKG. And in terms of efficiency, it's a little bit worse, but not much. So we have 2 group elements rather than 1 group element. We have 3 pairings to verify rather than 2 pairings. The only caveat I'd say to this is that if you then want to derive your unique component from your signature, that's going to cost you an extra 3 pairings in order to get to that component. I've mentioned this several times already. We have that RDKG is aggregatable. The reason we're able to do this is essentially because the secret that we're sharing is a group element. So we're able to encrypt it under AlGamal and then use the homomorphic properties of AlGamal. It's not actually AlGamal we're using, it's just something very similar to that. We're able to combine all of the encryptions into just the same encryption. So despite the fact that there is a total of n transcripts being communicated over the network, the final transcript that we're going to see and use is going to be the same size as if there was only 1 transcript. Of course, we still need to communicate all of the information in all of the n different transcripts. And the way we do this is via a gossip algorithm, which is more efficient than broadcast. So to conclude, our DKG is publicly verifiable, aggregatable, and does not have complaints rounds. We can use gossip communication to reduce the overall communication. We can build random beacons using our DKG combined with our VUF, and also threshold signatures, I should say there as well. It's the same idea. And our proving techniques are also highly applicable to other schemes. I should say that we also, in the paper, prove that you can run BLS signatures under the Pedersen DKG and have that be secure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mary. I see the remote audience is maybe a little bit asleep still, but I'm sure the live audience has many questions to ask Mary. Who has questions? One question down there, coming.
So do you support adaptive queries, corruption queries for the threshold scheme?
That's a very good question. The answer is no, we do not. But equally, I would also phrase this as being something of an open question, because the reason we can't is due to the proving techniques. The extractor would become exponential time in the number of participants if you want to be able to actually extract the information that you're going to need, because you have to guess in advance who is going to participate and who is not going to participate, which gives you n factorial choices. So if this actually did lead to an adaptive attack, I think it would be a big problem. But as far as I'm aware, and I have looked into it quite a lot, nobody has found adaptive attacks in 15, 20 years of looking for them for related schemes with similar problems. So I think either there maybe is an attack lurking which we've not found in 20 years, in which case it would be interesting to know about it, or maybe we've got our model wrong.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. More questions in the audience? Okay, while I go check, I may ask one of mine. I see there is an implementation component in your paper. You implemented in Rust, I believe.
Yes.
What kind of sizes? How many participants can you realistically scale to?
So in our proof of concept implementation of Rust, the biggest number that we used was 8,196, 92, whichever the power of 2 is. We could go more than that, but we haven't actually experimented going higher than that.
Thank you very much. More questions? Okay. Not online either. In this case, we'll thank Mary again, and we will move on to the next speaker. And the next speaker is going to be online, so we will stop the sharing and we'll wait for the speaker to pop up and share his screen. We see your screen now.
Okay, so it's not in the full screen, right?
Can you go full screen, maybe?
Wait, let me. Second.
Yeah, that looks great. Thank you very much. So the next talk is going to be on decentralized multi-authority ABE for DNFs from LWE. It's a lot of acronyms. By Pradesh Datta, Ilan Komargodsky, and Brent Waters, and Pradesh is going to present the talk. The floor is yours, Pradesh.
So thank you, Luca, for the nice introduction. So hi, everyone. I am Pradesh Datta, and I will be presenting the paper Decentralized Multi-Authority ABE for DNFs from LWE, which is my joint work with Ilan Komargodsky and Brent Waters. So attribute-based encryption, or ABE for short, is an advanced variant of a public key encryption scheme where a secret key is allowed to decrypt a ciphertext if and only if certain access policy is satisfied by a certain set of attributes. Now, ABE is considered in two flavors. One is a key policy and another one is ciphertext policy. In the key policy setting, a secret key is associated with an access policy, while a ciphertext is associated with a set of attributes. While for the ciphertext policy variant, the roles of the key policy and the roles of the policy and that set of attributes are switched. So in this work, we'll be particularly interested with the ciphertext policy variant. And we would also be interested, as the title suggests, in the multi-authority version of ABE. So note that in case of an ABE scheme, there's a central authority which is in charge of verifying the attributes of all the users and then issuing all the secret keys to them. However, as we know, in real life, there is no central authority that is controlling all the attributes. Instead, there are different authorities who are controlling the different attributes. And in order to handle this distributed nature of attribute possession, this version of ABE called the multi-authority ABE is considered in the literature. So in a multi-authority ABE scheme, any party basically can become an authority at any point of time, and there is no coordination required between the parties except the generation of a global public parameters that is available to all the parties in the system. And the different authorities control different attributes as usual, and then there is also no bound on the number of authorities that can ever come into existence during the entire lifetime of the system. And the authorities are able to issue secret keys to users for attributes under their control without any coordination with any other authority in the system. So these are the main existing results prior to our work in the area of MAABE. We have the celebrated work of Luca and Waters 11, who has presented an MAABE scheme in composite order bilinear group setting for NC1 access policies. And this scheme is proven secure against adaptive key queries under the subgroup decision assumption. Then later, Okamoto and Takashima translated this scheme into the prime order setting under the D-link assumption. And we also have the work of Rausalakis and Waters, who have presented another scheme for NC1 access policies under a novel Q-type assumption. However, the scheme has a weaker security, which is static security. But the advantage over the last two schemes is that their scheme is able to allow an arbitrary number of attributes per authority. And importantly, all these schemes are designed in a model called a global identifier model, or GID model, which identifies each user in the system by means of some unique identifier. For instance, you can consider the social security number to be an unique identifier of a user. And all the schemes require random oracles for their security. And as you can see that all the schemes are in the bilinear map setting. So this is our work. As the title suggests, we present the first MAAB scheme in the LWE model, under the LWE assumption. And our scheme is able to support DNF access policies. And we achieve the static security notion, same as Rausalakis Waters. And the number of attributes per authority in our scheme is also bounded, similar to the LW11 or OT13. So this is our work in more detail. We have basically shown that there exists an MAABE scheme in the GID model for access policies represented by DNF formulas that is proven statically secure against an arbitrary collision of parties in the random oracle model and under the LW assumption. So DNF, as we know, is basically the OR of ANDs. And the LW assumption that we use in this work is the sub-exponential modulus to noise ratio 1. So now I would give the high-level blueprint of our result. So we first start with a non-monotone non-monotone linear secret sharing scheme, or non-monotone LSSS, with two special properties. The first property is that the reconstruction coefficients are small in size, for instance, maybe coming from the set 01. So this property is crucial for the correctness, as we had to deal with the error of LWE. And the second property is that any subset of unauthorized rows of the share generating matrix are linearly independent. So this property is also very crucially utilized in the security proof of our MAABE. So starting with this kind of LSSS, for which we also present a construction for NC1 access policies, we then able to give the first direct construction of a CPABE scheme for NC1 access policies under the LWE assumption. And we also use the LSSS, the nonlinear LSSS, with these two properties as the underlying access policies. And our CPABE has two very interesting properties. Firstly, the randomness that ties together the different key components. So note that in case of any ABE scheme, collusion resistance is basically obtained by tying together the different key components of a user with fresh randomness that is specific to the user. And that randomness in our case is basically publicly computable. And the second property is that our keys, that means the master public keys and the user secret keys of our CPABE, have basically the piecewise structure. So that it means that those keys consist of components, each of which is associated with some specific attribute. And by virtue of these two properties, we are able to extend our CPABE scheme into a multi-authority ABE. And this extension is also a non-generic extension. That means it uses the specific structure of the CPABE. And in order to do that, we had to use, instead of a non-monotone LSSS, a monotone LSSS with the same two properties as for the non-monotone LSSS we use for our CPABE. And the reason that we had to use a monotone LSSS in this case and a non-monotone LSSS does not suffice is roughly the fact that in case of a CPABE, there is a central authority that can enforce the fact that the user can only get a key for an attribute or for its negation. However, in case of MAABE, an adversary colluding with corrupt authorities can get both, and thus can easily break the security of LSSS and hence the security of MAABE. So here I would like to mention one point. So basically our MAABE scheme supports access policies which are monotone LSSS and with these two properties. And since currently we do not know any monotone LSSS beyond DNF access policies, that's why our scheme currently can only support DNF access policies. So if in future we can get a monotone LSSS with these two properties, for some more advanced policy class such as NC1, then our scheme would be directly translated to supporting NC1 access policies. So in conclusion, we have designed the first MAABE scheme under the LWE assumption for some non-trivial class of access policies, and we also give the first direct construction of a CPABE scheme under the LWE assumption. There are a number of open problems. Firstly, can we have an MAABE scheme under LWE assumption for some access policies which is more expressive than DNF? Secondly, can we achieve stronger security guarantees? In this work, we only achieve the weak static security guarantee. Thirdly, can we have better parameters for ciphertext and key sizes? In this work, all these parameter scales with some worst case size bound on the policy supported in the system. And fourthly, is it possible to allow an arbitrary number of attributes per authority? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pradesh. I hope you could hear the applause here in the room. Are there any questions for Pradesh? I'm going to move to the other booth to see if there are questions online. I don't think there are. I don't see any other questions. Don't be shy. There's a microphone here. I have one more. So Pradesh, can you say a word about performance? How efficient do you think it would be, the scheme?
So the if the scheme is currently not efficient, as we said that we do require like all the ciphertext and key sizes. In fact, all the algorithms, the running time is actually, I think, is linear in the worst case upper bound. So currently the scheme is not efficient, but this is actually the very first step towards like a long-standing open problem. Like, can we get MAABE scheme which should be the ideal version of ABE under the LW assumption, which is believed to be post-quantum secure?
Thank you very much for your answer. I think we're going slightly over time, so in the interest of time, I will ask the audience to thank Pradesh again. And we will move to the next talk, which is going to be remote again by Yifu Lai. Yifu, are you here? Okay, we can read you, Yifu. Okay, your screen is coming. Great, we see your screen.
Okay, can you hear me?
And we hear you. That's excellent.
Thank you.
So since we're ready, the next talk on compact, efficient, UC secure, isogeny-based oblivion transfer by Yifu Lai, Stephen Galbraith, and Cyprien Delpech de Saint-Guilhem will be delivered by Yifu. Yifu, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. And firstly, we record the definition of an oblivion transfer scheme. The circumstance is like there's a two-party, Alice and Bob, mostly the sender and receiver. Alice has two messages and Bob would like to know one of them. They're doing an oblivion transfer scheme here. After the execution, there are two requirements. The first one is that Bob gets one and only one message. The second is Alice doesn't know Bob's choice. Keep in mind that this is a classical requirement for an OT scheme. A more modern security definition is called universally composable security, or UC security. The circumstance is like there's an environment machine. The environment machine will interact with an ideal machine or a real machine. In the real machine, there's a protocol you design and the adversary. And in the ideal world machine, there's a simulator and having bypass access to the adversary. And in the ideal world, every functionality is processed by a trusted party. So you can find that in the ideal world, everything is super secure because the functionality is processed by a trusted party. If you can show that your protocol in the real world, for any adversary, there exists a simulator in the ideal world such that the output of the real world machine and ideal world machine are indistinguishable to the environment machine, then your protocol has UC security. So our research question is that can we have an isogeny-based OT that is UC secure against malicious adversaries and take only a constant number of isogeny computation. Malicious means that the adversary is not required to follow the protocol specification. And semi-honest adversary means that the adversary will follow the protocol specification. They try to learn more information from the execution. The isogeny tool we rely on is CSI. I will assume you are familiar with this. And to have a crypto system, we need some computational assumptions. The most well-known one should be the computational CSI problem, which is quite similar to the Diffie-Hellman problem. And then we introduce a new assumption that is called reciprocal CSI problem. There are two, which is a two-round experiment. There are two parties, Alice Bob, or say the challenger and the adversary. Adversary send a super single curve to Alice first, and then Alice computes AE to Bob, and then Bob, the adversary's task is to compute AX and A inverse X. And we show that this reciprocal CSI problem is as hard as the computational CSI problem if the order of the ideal class group is given. And then our construction starts from a 3-round construction, and then we use quadratic twist to compress the construction as a 2-round construction. And then to have UC security, we add an additional mechanism here. And I would like to announce a correction for a fixable bug in our paper. This is the original design of our construction. Firstly, the receiver sends a super single curve to Alice. And then Alice, there's a mechanism we call proof of ability to decrypt mechanism with respect to B, which means that Bob should show he can really decrypt something by using this B. And then we merge this mechanism together with the ciphertext and send to Bob, which should be sufficiently secure if the distinguishing notion is the non-abort version, which means that the transcript won't take the abort transcript into account. But in a more general definition, like UC security, abort is part of the output of the functionality. So we require the receiver to show ability to decrypt before obtaining the ciphertext. That is, we separate the mechanism and the ciphertext. So our final product should be a 4-round construction instead of a 3-round construction. Sorry for failing to find out this problem before the submission. And then we set up a quadratic trapdoor, which is a trapdoor algorithm for the reciprocal CSI problem. You can by using this trapdoor algorithm, you can solve any reciprocal CSI problem with respect to a specific public key. And then we use this trapdoor algorithm to complete the other half of simulation for the corrupt sender case. And then this is our final result. Our final result is a 4-round construction with only a constant number of isogeny complications. And that is usually secure against malicious adversaries. So like this previous work, they are only semi-honest and secure against adversaries. And you can use UC secure zero knowledge proof to have UC secure against malicious adversary. That will take a polynomial number of isogeny computations. Importantly, our underlying assumptions, which is as hard as the computational CSI problem, as long as the order of the ideal class group is given. And we also point out some open problem relevant to this topic, like can we have a quantum random reduction between reciprocal CSI problem and the CSI problem? Because with the argument, we use rewinding argument. The second question is that can we have a round optimal efficient isogeny-based OT, which means a 2-round construction? The third question is that can we have an efficient adaptive UC secure isogeny-based OT, which means that the adversary can choose who to corrupt after the execution of the protocol. And thanks for listening. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Shifu. Are there any questions from the audience? I see one. I'm coming.
So thanks for the talk. Okay, it might be a really trivial question, but I was wondering, so is it easy to see if the class number is even, like for a curve?
Even?
So you said that the class number needs to be even, right? The size of the class group.
The class number should be given, not even.
I couldn't hear the response. I couldn't hear your response.
Already. I mean the number of the order of the group should be given.
Oh, should be given. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that.
But I have an answer to your question. Yes, it's easy to test. You can know if the class number is even. Any other questions from the audience? Let's see if online there are any questions. So I may have a question. So this OT protocol seems to be very specific to isogenies. It doesn't apply to a generic group action, cryptographic group action. What kind of assumptions would you need? What kind of axioms would you need to add to a group action to get the same protocol?
I think here we use a tool that's called projective twist, and we don't have such thing in other crypto systems or other computational assumptions. But you can make it more generally. If you have some two-round protocol, then you may have a chance to add some mechanism and to have a UC secure again malicious adversary. It might have a chance, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. We still have a little bit of time. Let me check if there are questions remotely. No, I don't see any. Any more questions in the audience? Okay, if not, let's thank Iful again.
Thank you very much.
And we will move to the last talk of the session, which is going to be delivered live. I mean, live in Croatia. If I can manage to use this Windows machine. Okay. Is there a way to really show the screen? Not really. You know how? Yeah. Hide. Oh, this one. Great. Thank you, Zoom experts. Okay, the last talk of the session is going to be on one-way functions and malleability oracles, hidden shift attacks on isogeny-based protocols by Peter Kutas, Simon-Philippe Mertz, Christophe Petit, and Charlotte Wetkemper. And Simon-Philippe is going to deliver the talk. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Luca. Hi, everyone. Let me talk about hidden shift attacks on isogeny-based protocols, and I'll just start with a summary straight away, what we did. The main contribution of our paper is that we give a sub-exponential attack on SIDH with certain parameter sets that we call overstretched and unbalanced. That works via a reduction to the abelian hidden shift problem. Such attacks are already known for other isogeny-based schemes, namely the ones that are based on ordinary curves and seaside. But because of SIDH's non-commutative nature, it was assumed that this type of attack does not necessarily apply there. We give our attack in a very general setting, so it also captures previous attacks and might be of interest for cryptanalysis in further areas. However, let me add a disclaimer right here. The attack does not apply to the balanced SIDH parameters as they were originally suggested by Zhao and De Feo, or to the NIST submission, the isogeny-based NIST submission psych for the post-quantum standardization process. Malleability oracles were in the title, so let's talk about what we call a malleability oracle. If you have a one-way function that's injective and you have a group action on the domain of this function, then we call a malleability oracle at one point in the codomain, f of I, if we can compute the output of a one-way function f of g times I for a group element without knowing I, basically. So you can basically map a group element to the output of a one-way function of g times I, where I is unknown. Why is this interesting? Because if you're given a malleability oracle and your acting group has certain properties, namely it acts freely transitive and on the domain, and it is abelian, then you can actually, well, you can always transmit this into a hidden shift problem. But in this setting, if you have these additional properties, then it can be solved on a quantum computer in sub-exponential time. So this is interesting for cryptanalysis. The one-way function that underlies SIDH maps certain subgroups of a public starting curve that are of a given size, say N1, to a codomain of the isogeny. So that's a curve. And we basically give a group G that is a multiplicative subgroup of, yeah, we call it the endomorphism ring mod N1. Basically, we identify certain isogenies that have both as domain and codomain, so it's an endomorphism, the starting curve, and that have the same action on the secret key space of a participant, say Alice. And for this group, we take an abelian one, we construct a malleability oracle under certain conditions. So what does this mean? If you have a secret isogeny, in the picture it's phi, from the public curve E0 to EA. EA is being made public by Alice in the protocol. Then if you have a theta that acts on the starting curve, basically you want to compute the curve that's in the bottom right corner of the diagram. Well, in general, you can't do that because you can't just act with a known endomorphism on a subgroup you don't know, the one that defines the phi in the top row. However, we observe that we can lift the acting element to an endomorphism that is of a certain norm, and then we can use the torsion point information that is provided in the SIDH protocol to basically compute the arrow that's on the right side of the commutative diagram. So from EA, the public information, and then if we can compute the arrow, we actually get to the bottom right corner. However, this lift requires unbalanced parameters. That's what I mentioned in the beginning. So if N1 is the security parameter of Alice and N2 the security parameter of Bob, then we require N2 to be greater than P N1 to the fourth. In traditional, the choice that was originally suggested is to choose both roughly of equal size. Let's use the rest of the talk to visualize this a bit. So if N1 is a power of 2, then the secret walk of Alice is in a graph that looks something like this, from a public starting curve E0 to a curve EA that is being made public. But the blue path, I'm not sure you can see the colors, but yeah, that's basically the secret. So now an adversary just picks any other path that has the same length. The length of the path is known, say the pink one, that leads him or her to a curve EA prime. And then you can evaluate the group action on the curve EA prime just because you know the path to it. So that's easy. And you can evaluate the group action on the curve EA using the malleability from the previous slide, malleability oracle from the previous slide. So this gives you basically two functions that are both from the group to the set of curves at a certain distance in some sense. And both of these functions are shifts of each other. And the shift can then be computed using a quantum computer in sub-exponential time. If you have recovered that shift, you can then just basically shift the kernel you know from the pink path onto the blue path and compute it. And that's how you recover the secret for parameters that allow for this attack. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Simon Philip. Any questions in the audience? There is one question coming there. Don't forget to, it's switched off. You need to switch it on.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh. Hi, Simon. Thanks for the talk. I was wondering, this thing that the parameters are overstretched, is it something that you can, say, encode the cost of the attack smoothly and then it becomes exponential for non-overstretched parameters? Or is it just that there is a hard requirement that just stops entirely the attack for, say, psych parameters?
So there's two parts. So first of all, The overstretch part is basically, you wouldn't get that for cycle parameters. Like you also have that N1 and N2 is usually like the product of them is P. And if you remember the unbalanced parameter, like it has to be greater than P. So that might not be possible, but there's other torsion point attacks where you have unbalancedness, but without the P factor. And there you can do actually exactly what you suggest. You can brute force part of the secret, and then you're left with an instance where you have the unbalancedness, and then you apply the torsion point attack.
Thank you.
Any more questions? We still have 1 minute. I don't see any online, so it's up to you in this room. Okay, well, I have one, and you know it. So it seems to me that you can construct, like if you have any one-way function, not just the SIDH one-way function, but just any one-way function, and you have an inversion oracle for the one-way function, then you can construct a malleability oracle, because just you will define an arbitrary group action on the space of secret keys, and that will define the malleability. And so you just apply the inversion, the group action, and then you apply a guiding function. And in this specific case, there is an inversion oracle for the SIDH one-way function in that range of parameters you give, and actually even in better ranges of parameters, which are torsion point attacks, which I believe you mentioned in the talk, or at least they are mentioned in the video. So the way you do the reduction here seems to be different from torsion point attacks. And it's a cute trick the way you do it. But how do you know that it's not just the same attack hiding behind a different facade?
It's a very good question. I don't have an answer for you here. I think it's something interesting to look into. It looks different, but I mean, we don't have a proof that it's actually qualitatively different and that there's not a reduction from one to the other. So it's, there's some facts that probably hint it might be similar, because you also need some overstretched parameters, and you have certain quadratic equations you need to solve that look similar. But it also feels very different in the entire setup, and you kind of only need it for the lifting part. So it's something interesting to look at, but I'm sorry, I can't answer the question right here. I think it's a very interesting one, though.
Yeah, I didn't expect an answer. I know it's a nil post question, and it's difficult to give an answer. Any more questions in the room? Okay, if not, we are right at lunchtime. So let's thank again all the speakers of the session. Including those who were remote. So we'll resume at what? I don't know, the organizers? 2. Okay, see you in 2 hours.